Welcome. You are watching Regional Wrap, episode 72, pre-recorded on the morning of Wednesday, 25th of January. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, One Nation and progressing to the Queensland Election 2024, is my guest, Senator Malcolm Roberts. It's a little less than 2 months since I last spoken to Senator Roberts, but as they say, a week is a long time in politics. In December, the federal parliament was recalled to ram through additional legislation. Senator Roberts will give an insight to the lead up to the parliamentary activities of 15th December and what it means for businesses and the Australian public. During the recess, the Prime Minister has ramped up the rhetoric on the proposed voice referendum, and it seems the opposition has finally found a voice. In Queensland, which will be much affected by the recent wave of federal legislation, the attention will be turning to the 2024 state election. With the primary vote of major parties continuing to wane, can One Nation emulate its 1998 election success? Welcome, Senator Roberts.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks for the invitation of having me as your guest.
Can you give us a bit of insight, because you did allude to it in our last conversation that Parliament was likely to run an extra day on that to get some legislation. Can you give us a bit of insight of all the drama in regards to herding up the cats and getting them back to Canberra and then get the legislation through, and who was making the deals, especially in the Senate?
Okay. The key point from this is not the nationalisation of our gas and coal sectors, especially gas. That is going to be terrible for prices of gas and energy in the future, but and a not very distant future either, within 12 months. So that's what everyone's focused on. But the real issue is what drove it. You alluded to the right thing when you said the process of doing this legislation, absolutely disgraceful. It is completely shoddy, deceitful, dishonest government. It is incompetence. It's driven by fear. They're afraid things won't get done. So, Bill, on the night before the one-day sitting in Parliament, we got the legislation at 9:30 p.m. in Senator Hanson's office. So I printed it at home. I carried it onto the plane. I read it on the plane. An absolute shambles, completely against what we stand for in Australia. It'll do enormous damage. So that's the process. Then they guillotined the debate. They stopped good speakers from speaking. So it was never properly ventilated. And this has been typical of what's happened with this Labor government. The Labor government has caught people by surprise. It has, for example, one of the early bills, the climate change bill, was in the Greens' hands weeks before we even saw it. It was in David Pocock's hands weeks before we even saw it. We got it very when the bill was imminent back in September. You can't run a country that way. You can't run it well. Sorry, you can run a country, but you can't run it well. And I mentioned the Greens and Labor and David Pocock, who's essentially a teal because he is funded by Climate 200 donation. So he's really a teal. So understand that in the Senate, Labor Party plus Greens have exactly half the numbers. That means they need one other person, because you have to have an absolute majority to pass something through. To defeat something, you just need it even. So what we've seen right from the start of this Parliament is David Pocock lining up with the Greens. So we've got the Teal, the Greens, and the Labor Party together. And what they've done, and it's a really clever thing, the Teals in the lower house have run for House of Representatives seats, and what they've done is only run for Liberal-held seats. They're trying to knock down the Liberals to make it very hard for them to get back into government. In the Senate, they're even cleverer. What they've done in the Senate is they've put up David Pocock, who's a very, very competent and exciting rugby player. He's well loved among Australians. He's done a phenomenal job as captain of the Wallabies. He's a nice guy. but they put him up against the Liberals in Australian Capital Territory in the Senate seat and the Labor Party. So the Labor Party has got a lot of bureaucrats who are Labor soft, so they voted for their Labor candidate. The Liberals normally get one in as well, but David Pocock would have appealed to the Conservative vote because of his rugby stance. And now we have basically a socialist and a climate alarmist in there replacing the Liberals. So what we've got now is we've got David Pocock substituting for the Liberals, but he's really a socialist bent. So we now have a majority in the Senate that's concocted by Labor, Greens, and Pocock. And that's very, very damaging for us, for the country.
Just on that point, it's hard to believe, like when you talk about the Teals and the seats they won in the lower house and that, and where they took those seats from, that there's constituency there. Actually, I don't know if they realise it, but they've effectively elected people who are socialist. Because the same thing, and in the case of David Pocock especially, you know, he's given the tick to the Labor to introduce IR bills that actually adversely affect a lot of medium to small businesses through allowing the unions to have bargaining power within those things. And I don't know how long it's going to take for the constituents of these sort of seats to realise that they actually move from being supposedly conservatives to actually backing socialist agenda.
It's a really important point you just made. You did it. You extended the point I was trying to make earlier. So I just take issue with one thing. I'm not opposed to unions having power, where unions are representing the members. What I am opposed to is union bosses having power. And that's what the Labor government has done. The Labor government does not care a fig about workers, does not care about workers. Look at their policies on energy. Look at their policies on immigration. They do not care about workers, but they love the money from the union bosses that help the Labor Party campaign. So what the Labor Party did was very quickly put in place their abolition of the Australian Building and Construction Commission and gave power to union bosses. Now, many union bosses actually work for their workers. I've got no problem with that. But some union bosses, especially in some of the bigger companies, bigger unions, are pushing their own political agenda and power. That's the way it works. So you give Labor the money, they get into government, they then give the union bosses power to have control over workers, not power for the workers. So you're absolutely right there. And David Pocock, as some people are referring to him, Doormat Dave, he doesn't understand this. And he goes with the what looks to be good. He thinks he's for workers, but he's not. He's actually hurting workers. So we've got a Labor, Greens. Oh, the other thing I must mention, Bill, is that the Teals were successful because the Liberals abandoned their principles. If you've got Liberals like Josh Frydenberg used to be a skeptic, climate skeptic. He's in an inner city, he was in an inner city seat. And so he started to realize the Greens were encroaching upon his vote, and so was the Labor Party, because of his stance on climate. So without any evidence, he changed his stance on climate. Now, if you're one of the voters in his seat of, I think it was Kooyong, wasn't it?
Kooyong.
And you're confronting the Labor Party, you're probably not going to vote for them. The Greens, well, they're a bit extreme. They're very extreme and destructive, so you're probably not going to vote for them. But you've just heard Frydenberg talking about embracing the need to do something on climate. So you're thinking, well, he's a Johnny come lately. I'll go with the genuine ones, the Teals, because they're supposed to be like Liberals, but they believe in climate change. So by endorsing climate change as being caused by humans when it is not, it's just natural climate variability. Josh Frydenberg undermined himself. He gave the Greens credibility. So did the other Teals. Zimmerman got knocked out. The people who were soft on climate got the boot by the Teals. The Liberals, I don't think have learned yet. So, but that's the point. They've got to stand by their principles.
Well, I think that's getting harder and harder for them to do, because I think they've been become so afraid to stand up for their principles, and they definitely haven't had a decent spokesperson and a fighter since Abbott.
Yes, I agree with you. So what we see is a very poor setup. We've got a government in the lower house. As you know, the government, whoever has a majority in the lower house forms government. That's the Labor Party. They got less than a third of the votes, Bill, as you know, yet they're forming government. And in the Senate, we've got the Labor Party and the Greens and David Pocock like this. When Labor blesses David Pocock, he's been given many opportunities that we don't get to give him the limelight. Then what they're doing is keeping the Senate in a position where they have one Labor from the ACT and one Pocock or Teal from the ACT. Freezes out the Liberals. So that they're looking after David Pocock, and David Pocock is looking after the Labor Party to get some of his pet projects through. The Greens, I have no regard for the Greens whatsoever. Some of them are quite competent and some are genuine when it comes to financial matters and holding the banks accountable. But the Greens are very, very dangerous. They're the most destructive political force in the country. What we did see with the Greens was that they honestly supported orders for the production of documents from the government, the previous government. Now they've closed ranks with the Labor Party and they do not support many orders for the production of documents. So the Greens talking about scrutiny and integrity is complete rubbish. Pocock,
only one side.
Yes, Pocock has also voted for the Labor Party, with the Labor Party and the Greens, to guillotine debates, to cut off debate. We've had some very good speakers not able to speak on some of these bills. So what they do is they introduce it at 9:30 the night before. We read it on the plane going to Canberra. I've got some very good staff, so we had a good speech. But then it gets guillotined, and then it just gets rammed through. And because they have the numbers, the Labor Party and the Greens and David Pocock together ram it all through. So that's how we've got this terrible legislation.
Well, the legislation that's in regards to the energy bill, it seems to be, if you look at Terry McCrann's sort of saying, is that if a problem hasn't been created by government, it's a good chance it's been made worse by government. And we seem to have legislation that's come in that's caused problems, and then they have to add more, address it, and they just simply add more problems. And I think this energy bill and the energy relief bill, it speaks volumes about that in regards to they've had policies that have driven up electricity prices to levels that are getting difficult for a lot of people to pay for. So now they've come in with this thing, well, we'll offset some of that with some customer relief type thing. But are people that stupid in regards to, well, we've pushed up the bills on consumers and now we've got to help them, but we've got to use taxpayers' money, which is basically the same people, to help them out.
Well, it's not a matter of people being stupid. People have seen massive propaganda from governments, Liberal, Nationals and Labor, Greens. That has been the case. Gillard had something like 150 journalists working for her government back in the Labor Greens coalition government. And we see the same in Queensland. We see the same with the Liberal Party. They employ journalists. And what happens is the journalists who are writing for the media are flat out. So they just take their media releases and sometimes just transcribe it straight into the newspaper or read it into the TV news program. So we've got government massively using propaganda to get their message through. And all you see in the headlines is Labor's bill will cut prices. It's complete rubbish. It's crap. But and what will happen is it'll actually worsen prices, as I'll explain in a minute. But people are not stupid, but they've been dumbed down by being fed propaganda. And when it's repeated, and Anthony Albanese talks about the voice. You mentioned the voice a minute ago. The voice, we have not one detail on how it will work. We know it's fundamentally wrong, fundamentally flawed. It'll create separation, divide the country. It's based on race. So here's the Labor Party introducing a racist bill. But there is not one shred of detail about that. And then he has the hide to say, if we don't get it in the referendum, we'll legislate it, which he's trying to encourage voters to vote for it in the referendum because they think they'll get it anyway. If the voters don't want it at the referendum, he should not legislate it. It's that bloody simple. So what we're saying on The Voice until you know, vote no.
Hmm.
Until you know the details, vote no. So that's the voice. But what this bill does with the energy relief bill, it nationalizes the gas sector. The government can come in and tell them what to produce, what to sell it for, who to sell it to, how much they can sell, the prices, etc. That is nationalization. So what we've got is a worsening of the situation, because now you'll see a fall in investment. Because if you're investing in gas, then you're looking at pretty massive outlays. That means you've got a risky business. If you hit pay dirt with gas, good, you get a good profit. But you're reluctant as an investor to put money into the gas sector because you don't know what the price will be. What business invests without knowing the price and the volume and knowing that someone else can control everything about your business? You're in the hands of dopey politicians, dishonest politicians. And so what's going to happen is you're going to see, after the cap runs out, you're going to see a massive increase in gas prices. Families will be really hurt then. Small business will be really hurt then. Industry and agriculture will be hurt. So the cap actually stifles investment and makes things worse, which looks to higher prices. So that's the stupidity. Everywhere in history, whenever you bring in a price cap, prices rise. It is that simple.
Well, the thing that amazes me, I think they got their lessons in Economics 101 straight from Venezuela.
Yep.
Because soon as the government starts playing around with nationalised interest or controlling interest, it all goes pear-shaped. And I don't understand why Australian politicians think they can do the same thing and get a different result.
Because what's happened in this country is the media has driven the political agenda. So what we have is essentially, it's changing, fortunately, but essentially we have people thinking, I'll vote Labor, and then when they go off, I'll vote Liberal. They don't realize that both those parties have almost identical policies. Name a single policy area where they have a significant difference in policy. There is not one. So what happens is the Labor Party introduces legislation, a mechanism, and then the Liberal Party builds on it and trenches it. The Liberal Party has introduced in Kyoto Protocol, UN's Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, the 2050 net zero. The Liberal Party under Howard, under Abbott, sad to say, under Turnbull, under Morrison, introduced the basic climate mechanisms that the Labor Party is now turbocharging. So what we see is Morrison said he would, in the 2019 election, he won that election on the basis that he would not bring in 2050 net zero, and he scolded the Labor Party for doing so. Then once he got in, he changed that. So what we've seen is both parties are pushing the same climate agenda that's driven by the UN and the World Economic Forum. So that's why we get into this mess. And you mentioned a little while ago, you said we have got into this mess by tinkering with electricity and with energy. That's how we've got bureaucratic fiddles. So what's the solution to it? More bureaucratic fiddles, said the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. That's just absurd.
In another aspect too, it seems like the Queensland government has also doubled down on the coal industry in regards to their royalties take. So our major industry in Queensland seems to be under attack on both sides, from both sides, federal and state. And then on top of that, you've got restrictions to projects. But then in other areas, we've got big tick in the box for renewable projects that just seem to be going through willy-nilly. But the interesting thing is a lot of the public are now starting to arc up about that.
Yes, you're right. What we see is John Howard created the national electricity market when he was Prime Minister. His government created the national electricity market. When you look at our constitution, it's a federation. The states are independent sovereign states who had most of the power under the constitution to provide most of the services a government must provide. I like minimal government services being provided by government, but there are many things that have to be done. The alternative to a monopoly, to a government-run system, is a monopoly in private hands. At least with the government, you can vote them out. But with a monopoly, private monopoly, that's them. They're stuck there. So we have to get some services from the government. Significant services like roads, like water, like electricity, where you cannot afford to duplicate the services. You can't have 2 electricity networks or 3 electricity networks. You've got to have one. So what we've done is we used to have competitive federalism where the states competed, and that it's not ruthless competition, but the states competed to have do a better job of running their states. When we saw South Australia destroy their electricity sector a few years ago, businesses left, people left. They came to Queensland where there's more, where there's a better electricity sector because we have our coal-fired power. When Dan Andrews made such a mess in Victoria, 200,000 Victorians voters left. They came to Queensland. You know, Dan Andrews got the award, so they say, of being the best real estate agent salesman in Queensland, because he was responsible for selling so much property because people coming up here. So what you see, and Joe Bjelke-Petersen, when he abolished death duties, people left the other states and came to Queensland. That's why the Gold Coast took off, and that's why it's got so many retirees, because people didn't want to be taxed for their estate when they died. They wanted to give as much as they could to their kids. That's why they came to Queensland when Joe abolished death duties. And when that happened, Bill, the other premiers realised what was going on, and they abolished death duties. So now you've got the Labor Party under Albanese, and especially under Bill Shorten, talking about restoring death duties as a single federal tax. So we've got to get as much as possible back to the states where you have competition. Health policy, education, get it back to the states. And so energy is the same, electricity is the same, get it back to the states. What we've got now is a national electricity racket, not a national electricity market. What we've got is federal bureaucrats and state bureaucrats both interfering with the national electricity supply, the national energy supply, and you've got a bureaucratic racket that favors people who've got the best lobbyists, who've got the best bribes for the politicians. I'm being blunt.
The other thing is too, these centralisations of things like education and health and that, it's sort of not really done us any good. I mean, if you look at education, we've poured heaps of money into that, but the outcomes are, to say the least, very ordinary. Now, when I went to school, the states ran their own curriculums, and I came from West Australia. We only had 12 years of schooling. We had 7 primary and 5 high school, whereas most of the other states had 13 years. But our education system was, quite good. We actually had an extra exam system in there at year 11 called the high school certificate, I think. And then I think the final year was called matriculation, and that was basically aimed to get you a score to get into university. But we've got a Commonwealth and Canberra with health departments, education department with thousands of bureaucrats, but not one school or hospital do they run. But there again, the problem is the Commonwealth, when the states during the war gave them the income tax revenue, and they never gave it back. The Commonwealth just holds too much power in that revenue collection. And states have basically become very dependent on getting the GST return and other grants to provide the services. Do you think there's a way out somewhere along the line in regards to either making that outflow of money from the Commonwealth less coercive in regards to telling the states what to do, just give them back their entitlement money, and what they do is up to them?
Yes, there is a way out. I'll talk more about tax reform in a minute, but you're absolutely correct. When you have a central bureaucracy like our education system in Canberra, like our health system in Canberra, like our environmental system in Canberra, they're duplicated at the state level. So that you've got waste of cost right there. Who pays for that? Taxpayers. But in addition, you've got something more insidious. You've got federal bureaucrats who basically control the curriculum, and they feed that curriculum to the states. If this federal government had no interference in education, the United Nations, to introduce its insidious policies hurting kids would have to go to each state. And all it needs is 1 or 2 states to say, go to hell, and nothing's going to happen. But when they go to Canberra, they say, here's what you need to do. The UN policies are adopted and they're fed to the states. That's a very, very significant difference between the federal system and the state system. We need federal government to look after defense, foreign affairs, currency, border security, trade between the states, make sure there's no unfair advantage. The rest of it, basically give it to the states, which is where it was supposed to be and which is where it was. But as you pointed out, the federal government in 1943 stole the right to levy income tax, and now it controls the purse strings. So a very good mayor told me this. I didn't realize it until that time, a couple of years ago. He said that the federal government has the money. The state government has the power politically and legislatively. And the local governments or the local councils have the problems. So federal government has the money, state government has the power, local councils have the problems. Now, when you look at the way the money is raised, I asked the Balonne Shire Council in 2017, what proportion, they're based at St. George, what proportion of their annual revenue comes from taxes from the federal government, or just comes from the federal government? And they told me 73%. There are other shires where 90% comes from the federal government. It introduces 2 major problems. When they give grants from the federal government, they essentially go through the states and some of it gets piled off. The ticket is clipped. But then when they go to the local council, they've got sometimes federal and state conditions attached. So who's really determining the spending in local government? It's the federal government. So we have got massive government, central bureaucracy controlling what happens in many local councils. So that's insane. The people in the Balonne Shire Council know best how to run their council. And then the second thing is that because they're at the whim of politics, those grants might only last for 3 years. They might last for 5 years. What the hell does the local government or local council do after 3 years or 5 years? How the hell can they plan for 25 years with a long-term plan? It can't happen. So what we've got is we've got federal governments exercising their politics and their control on local governments in this country. The way to fix it, I believe, is let the states have the power to tax, because then you've got competition between the states. Remove the power from the federal government. I'm not saying add state taxes. I'm saying remove the federal taxation and hand it back to the states. The states had the right to levy income tax before the federal stole it from them. But the other thing is we need to put the taxation system ultimately back in the people, where the people set the tax rate, and politicians can't offer bribes by increasing taxes, can't offer bribes to their vested interests and their mates, because they have to go to the people cap in hand and say, because of this particular interest, we need to raise taxes. Will you please vote for taxes? The people in this country don't realize that this is the first country and the only country in the world where the people voted for the Constitution. The only way you can change the Constitution is when a majority of voters. So the people who are voting in this country are the ones who determine government. They're the sovereigns. They are the sovereign entity. The Constitution is a sovereign entity, and the people control the Constitution, not the politicians. So what we've got to do is help people to get their power back. And the way the power is best taken back is by voting for the best candidate, not party propaganda, the best candidate.
I think the other thing there is in regards to the Constitution, especially because of the income tax revenue and the fact that the Commonwealth now gets between 90 and 95% of all revenue, tax revenue, they've been able to coerce the state governments into basically surrendering power by saying, well, if you do this, we'll give you X number of dollars, whether it's education, health, or whatever. So I think the real issue is, can we actually get the Constitution and obedience to the Constitution back to where it was intended in those sort of aspects to curtail the coercion of the federal government on the states? And the other thing is I think the High Court has interpreted a lot of the things in the
Yeah.
Constitution to the detriment of the Australian people, and that's another issue.
Yeah, I agree with you on both of those issues. We've actually, where we used to have competitive federalism, where each state would try and do a better job on revenue or spending, and the other states would then copy to keep their people. We've now got competitive welfareism. We have, no, I'm serious.
It is.
You know,
Business welfare too.
Yes, and we've got competitive welfareism, where Western Australia, I don't know what the numbers are now. I think they might be around 70 cents, but they were a few years ago. For every dollar that Western Australia put into the system through GST, they got 37 cents back. Now, New South Wales and Victoria are the other states that put more money in than they get out. But Tasmania gets a phenomenal amount out. South Australia
$1.73 now.
I think it's even higher.
I think it's $1.73
in Tassie.
Yep.
Okay, I didn't know that. If you look at South Australia, it's got it's rich in natural resources, but they're gutting their electricity sector. They're gutting their energy sector. They're shutting down they've shut down coal-fired power station. They're a basket case because of stupid policies from the state government. What does South Australia do? Just puts out its hand and gets GST money from the federal government. Queensland.
Or contract for submarines, or defence industry moves over there. And that's one of the real worst things about it, how the Commonwealth can manipulate industries to support different states rather than allowing to be competitive.
Exactly. And then you look at our state of Queensland, thanks to Beatty, Bligh and Palaszczuk, we are a basket case. We have the #1 export income earner in the country, coal. It's past iron ore because the prices moved so much with coal and prices fell with iron ore. So at the moment, we're exporting. Our #1 export is the country's #1 export, coal. We've also got tourism. We've got other minerals. We're rich in minerals, not as rich as Western Australia, but we are rich in minerals. We take more out of the federal coffers than we put in with GST. We're bludging. And why are we bludging? Because we've got a huge debt. As a result of COVID and Dan Andrews' mismanagement of COVID, we now see Victoria got the biggest debt, I think. But the Queensland government got to $110 billion before COVID. That is absurd. How the hell can we? Well, we got there because of politics being played in this state. Beatty, Bligh and Palaszczuk. You know?
Well, they're obviously trying to make the best of getting that more money in the prisoners' coffers with the royalty changes. Now, if we just start on this point in regards, have you seen the ads by the, I think that's backed by the Queensland Resources Council, highlighting the higher take of royalties from the rising prices of coal? I did have a discussion with one of the executives of Queensland Resources Council in regards to that ad before they actually put it out. I said, well, with that program, I hope you're going to hit hard in regards to the value of coal to Queensland and further investment in it. But then I see the ads that they've got and they really are pathetic.
Well, you know, I rarely watch TV, but be that as it may, but I rarely watch TV, but I have seen the ad. I think I've seen it twice. And I would agree with you. But the moment I see that ad from the Queensland Resources Council, I switch off for one simple reason. Ian Macfarlane was a National Party or Liberal, I think Liberal seat in National, was it? In the seat of Groom. He was Resources Minister. That mongrel, I went to school with him, right? So I mean, he was a good friend of mine at school, no problem. But I call him a mongrel now because he did a good job on Al Gore's science fiction movie, An Inconvenient Truth. Ian Macfarlane is a bloody climate skeptic, and so he should be, but that's where the data is. But then when it came turn for Malcolm Turnbull to get into the Prime Minister's job, Ian Macfarlane suddenly abandoned the climate skepticism and folded in with the climate alarmists in the Liberal Party. He sold his soul. And then the industry that's got most to lose from climate change, from the climate alarm, which is unjustified, is the coal sector. And what does the coal sector do? They appoint him as in charge of their entity. So I cannot stomach that. When you go against your principles just to get a job, it's totally wrong. How can he represent the coal sector?
I think the other thing is this coal sector used to represent itself years ago, and it's allowed itself to be whittled down and not stand up for itself, and now is encompassed by the Queensland Resources Council.
Yes.
An industry as big as that, and the same for the iron ore industry, should have their own peak bodies and be out there fighting for their industry to make sure it delivers for the Australian people and delivers for the people employed in it and the people who invest in it.
Yeah, I can remember that, the days of Joe Bjelke-Petersen. Joe made no bones about taking a fair share of our coal and other minerals for the Queensland taxpayer. Queensland Rail was kept afloat by the coal industry and the Mount Isa rail line. That was it. The services that the commuters relied upon in Brisbane were funded by coal and Mount Isa mines. And we need to recognise and that since then we've had Labor Party put us in massive debt and start flogging off the assets that the people paid for. How can you do that? But the Labor Party is chronic for doing that. If you come back to the solar and wind subsidies, solar and wind are supposedly cheapest. That is complete rubbish. They are the most expensive. The cheapest is hydroelectricity, where you've got sufficient water. We have that in the north, but no one wants to talk about it, just us, about putting in a hydro dam up in the Burdekin area. Then we have the second cheapest is coal, by a long way. Then the third cheapest is nuclear. And in some areas, for example, South Australia, we should be using nuclear because they've got abundant nuclear resources, and their coal deposits are low efficiency coal deposits, and they're dirty coal deposits. Queensland has got abundant, clean, cheap coal. We should be using coal for generating our electricity. Solar and wind are way down the list. They're the most expensive there is. And not only are they directly more expensive, when you look at their low energy density, you don't get much energy out of a solar panel or a wind turbine compared with the massive capital investment you've got to put in to build the panels, build the turbines. To give you an example, a wind turbine, for 1 unit of electricity that comes out of a coal-fired power station, it takes 35 tons of steel. For a wind turbine, for each unit of energy that comes out of it, the same unit of energy, it takes about 546 tons of steel. Steel is not free. That's why wind turbines are so damn expensive. Then you look at the things like we've got to have, what do they call them? Stability, synchronous. You've got to have wind and solar are not synchronous. You've got to have stability management of them. They're not reliable, which means instead of having 1 unit of electricity, you've got to have 3 units of electricity, which massively increases your solar complex or your wind turbines, because the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine at night, the sun doesn't shine on rainy days. So you've got to have massively greater capacity. Then you've got to have something for when it's down. Then you've got to have batteries. But batteries aren't even close, not even close to making up for that capacity. So what we're doing, we've got the most expensive, the only unreliable wind source, and we've got a massive security problem. And here we are, Bill, supposedly doing solar and wind because our climate's going to hell. There's no evidence that climate is changing, none at all. But what we've got is we've got the lunatics and the Greens, the Teals, the Liberal Party, the National Party, the Labor Party, all saying we've got to change because of the climate. The weather's getting more extreme. It's not. But so what do? They make our electricity generation dependent on weather. Insane. There's no logic to it.
The other thing is you just touched on the capital investment required for renewables. The peak power on the national grid was probably, I think it was about 2018 during summer, and the peak power was just over 38 gigawatts. That's a sort of spike for that period. And actually, it lasted for a few days because there was a bit of a heat wave. Now, if you're going to invest to replace that baseload power with renewables, the figures from the Keenan Institute in the United States basically require you to spend equivalent to $760 billion in renewables, both solar, batteries, and wind. Now, if we're going to have to put up a capital cost of $760 billion for a new electricity grid, and that's without transmission wires as well, which is another kettle of fish. I can't see, I don't know who's doing the mathematics or whatever, but how anyone can think we should replace a gigawatt of baseload power, which we can do with new coal plants, probably less than $2 billion each. And instead of, but rather spend $760 billion on wind and solar and batteries.
It's impossible, given our resources of rare earths and other exotic minerals. It is impossible to build everything that is needed. Impossible. That's physically impossible. Cost-wise, it is completely impossible. And who'll pay for this? This is very, very damaging, but always with these government mistakes, the people who pay are the taxpayers. Here's something interesting for you, Bill. I think I asked Senator McAllister when we were debating the climate change bill in September. I said, where is your empirical scientific evidence and logical points that shows an argument that we need to do something about climate? All right, we need to cut carbon dioxide from human activity. She came back a few hours later and said, here's the speech that I gave in 2016. And I didn't bother reading it then because I knew what I was going to find. So this time I did read it. I mean, I read it once and just dismissed it. It's complete wacko. So I read it this time. I read all of these pages, 20 bills, 20 papers rather, and another 5. So 25 papers. I'll give you the titles to some of these papers. Now, I asked her for the causes of climate change that are attributable to carbon dioxide from human activity. One of the papers is entitled Biological Response to Climate Change on a Tropical Mountain. I mean, you get it straight away. Most people get it straight away. That's not causing, that's a supposed effect of it. There's another one here, Ecological Responses to Recent Climate Change. Do you know where she got these bloody papers from? She went to the Thomson Reuters media outlet and looked for the 20 most read papers on climate change. Did do no analysis on cause and effect. Not one of her, and I said I want empirical evidence. She gave me 11 that have models, 9 that are talking about the effects, not the cause. Not one of them talks about the cause of it being due to carbon dioxide. We even have some papers questioning, in her list, we even have some papers questioning whether or not humans are actually having an impact. The woman has no understanding of science, but that's the basis on which the Liberal Party, the National Party, the Labor Party, and the Greens are pushing this rubbish. No basis in science.
I think the other thing is the change from catastrophic anthropogenic global warming to climate change and pushing that thing is provided them with this shield in regards to it's hard to define between the natural variation and anything that may be human induced. But that's how they basically cover this situation, is climate change. And I'm a skeptic, but I believe in climate change. Well, I'll never deny it because it's something that's happened since Adam was a boy, sort of thing, and it will continue to happen. We go from we're currently in an ice age, which most people don't even get, and then we're very fortunate in this part of the ice age that we're actually in an interglacial period rather than being in a glacial period. And I was speaking to a Professor Howden from the Australian National University, and he almost pulled himself back as saying that the situation that we're creating may actually, and he pulled himself back, but I'm sure he was leading into, may prevent us from going back into the glacial period, which is probably due in another 5 to 10,000 years.
Yeah, well, did we talk in the previous show? Did we talk about my submission to the Senate inquiry into the climate change bill, the Labor's climate change bill?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, okay, so you don't need to go through that.
No.
But CSIRO has got no evidence that we need to cut carbon dioxide. CSIRO has never had any. The Bureau of Meteorology has never had any. I know from Freedom of Information requests, I know from parliamentary library searches that no politician in Canberra has ever been given a report that we need to do something about it. Not one. They've made it up.
But the thing that concerns me is we're going to continue down this road, and there's a couple of issues in regards to the escalating price of electricity, and then also with the extra renewables to be installed, the ecological damage that's got to be incurred. Have they invested so much that they'll never admit they're wrong, that they'll just keep going to oblivion?
Yes, but we'll stop them because we're building up a very strong case. But you know, we have got complete information that shows there's nothing to be done on climate. There's no change. The CSIRO couldn't even show us any statistically significant change in temperature, change in storms, change in ocean temperature, change in ocean alkalinity. Not one climate factor shows any change. You know, there's a difference between natural variation, where you see temperatures do this, and change when it goes up like that. So you have natural variation, you have a change, you have more natural variation. There's nothing like that. It's all just natural variation. And the UN's climate body, way back in its early days, back in the 80s, specifically said they are researching, they're not researching natural climate change. So any signals from climate, they're attributing to humans. But here's something else, Bill. We will keep going on this, Pauline and I, and we've got a couple of Liberals on board now, but they're not getting much traction. But we will keep going. We will undo this. People are waking up, because what a good friend of mine said some years ago, he said, you've been pushing this, Malcolm, for years. Nothing's going to happen till the people feel the pain. People are hurting, Bill. People are hurting. And what we've also got to see is, you look at, they call solar and wind renewables. I don't call them that. Solar and wind are renewable because you have to renew the bloody panels and the solar and the wind turbines less than that, 12 to 15 years.
I think this is probably one of the interesting things that will probably get the debate to switch. I think there's 2 points. One, as you said, it's the pain. The pain in the pocket makes people wake up and start taking a bit of interest in what's being fed to them. The other thing that's now happening, especially, New South Wales and Queensland both, is the number of projects, renewable projects coming proposed and being considered, and the realisation, especially by a lot of communities that are affected, the actual devastation. Now we have groups in Cairns and around Mackay that are impacted by proposed and actual projects that are in the mill, and it's got to keep rolling down south. I think there's another big wind farm down towards Bundaberg, and then there's got to be ones around the Vertic and Mount Fox. As these things come on, the public debate has to be noticed in regards to what the communities are saying, and that complete outlandish tick in the green tick that they get to implement these projects so rapidly.
Well, I've got to mention Steve Andrew, the One Nation member for the state seat of Mirani. He's done a marvelous job of backing people who are protesting against solar and wind complexes. And by the way, just on that, people are waking up. We now see One Nation members of Parliament in Victoria, Upper House, in South Australia, Upper House, New South Wales, Upper House with Mark Latham and Rod Roberts. Where's the other one? Queensland, of course, and Pauline and myself in the Senate. So we've got 5 of the 7 parliaments in this country have now got One Nation members in them. So that's a very good trend for us. The wind and solar, I'll give you an example. Pauline and I were invited up to Kilcoy, which is in the Brisbane Valley, not so far from Brisbane, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours drive. We went up there, and they're on a creek. The farmers were so concerned because they're on a creek called Neera Creek. Neera Creek flows into, I always get Stanley and Brisbane rivers mixed up, flows into the Brisbane River, which goes into Lake Wivenhoe, okay? So Lake Wivenhoe supplies water, to Brisbane, Bow Desert, Toowoomba if need be, Gold Coast, Beenleigh, Ipswich. About 2.5 million people get their water supply from Wivenhoe Dam. When you think about these, what the farmers were concerned about was that the Chinese wanted to come in and buy the land alongside Neera Creek and the mountain range hills next to it, and put in place the world's largest solar panel complex. So think about this. We have got that as a major hailstone storm area. When you look at, when you break a solar panel, even if you don't break it, it still leaches toxic chemicals, carcinogenic chemicals, including lead, and I've forgotten the others. But when you break them, they're leaching out normally. When you break them with hail damage, then they leach out in massive quantities. They flow into Neera Creek, down Neera Creek, into the Brisbane River, into Wivenhoe, into your drinking water. So this is just insane. And then they're very expensive. Plus they're being put on good croppable land and good beef country. So we're sterilizing our country. Around wind turbines, they're sterilizing humans nearby because of the wind damage. They're just making people's lives misery. So and what are we doing? We export our prime metallurgical coal, the best in the world, to China, where they build steel to make wind turbines, which they send back to us, and we subsidize them for it. When we also export our thermal coal, our steaming coal for power stations in China. China uses coal-fired power stations for the majority of their electricity, and hydro. So when they're producing their electricity from coal-fired power stations, they use our coal, they generate the electricity, they sell it at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Our coal used at a pit mouth here, straight into the power station, is sold at 25 cents a kilowatt hour. 3 times as much, but no transport cost for coal. How can that be? It's because we subsidize the installation of solar and wind, which jacks up the price of our electricity. So we're basically exporting coal, steaming and metallurgical coal to China so they can send wind turbines and solar panels back here. We've given them almost complete control of the solar and wind processes. That's a very dangerous security thing. We've raised the price of our electricity. Electricity, number one cost component in manufacturing today is electricity. It used to be labor, not anymore, because they've become so mechanized. So it's now electricity. When you have expensive electricity, your manufacturers can't compete with those in cheap electricity. So we are subsidizing the Chinese solar and wind, which is driving up the cost of our electricity. We're actually exporting our jobs, exporting our industry, exporting our military security, our industrial power base. We're exporting it all to China. We are completely mad.
Just moving on to the, I know Steve Andrews, and I think his area is also up for the big pumped hydro project. It amazes me that the state government can talk about finding $12 billion for pumped hydro, and also talk up investing up to $64 billion in other renewable projects. Yet we've still got a Bruce Highway, which has just recently been returned into a goat track because of the weather. As we go to the 2024 election, Do you see a revival of One Nation to the heady days of 1998 somewhere along the future?
Yes, I do. I can't forecast the future. No one can. In 1998, there were exceptional circumstances, and basically what happened in 1998, Bill, you were around. The people realized that Pauline was speaking the truth, and they admired her guts, and they were tired of Labor and tired of the Liberals. So what they did was they voted One Nation. 23% of the people in the 1998 state election voted for One Nation, almost a quarter overnight. And then Labor Party and Liberal Party, Howard in federal politics, Beattie in the state politics, they colluded to do a really big job on Pauline Hanson. They lied about her. They called her a racist. She has never issued a racist word in her life. Never. She is not a racist. We see Aboriginals, when I go into an Aboriginal community, we are welcomed. I see Aboriginals coming down from the territory to talk with Pauline because they can see that she's got the best way of fixing the Aboriginal problems. When I was first in Parliament in 2016, we went to an Asian restaurant. It was a Vietnamese restaurant in the suburb of Griffith in Canberra. We couldn't get out of the joint because everyone wanted Pauline's signature. I mean, we had a lovely meal, but the Asians wanted her signature. Why do the Asians like her? Because they are hard workers. They come here, they on the bones of their ass. They come here, whether it be off a boat or legally. They come here because they want the freedom to be able to work. They work hard. They value that. And they can see that under Liberal and Labor, we will destroy the work ethic in this country. So that's why they like Pauline. So what we've seen is, as I said, we've now got members of Parliament in the state parliaments at South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and federal. So we are growing. But what happened was the Labor Party and the Liberal Party colluded to brand Pauline a racist, to brand Pauline all kinds of vile names, to lock her up. Beattie changed the legislation in this state to lock her up. Then, despite that, she was released because she was innocent. So we see this incredible, and then we see the media won't report our stuff that we do well, and they will make lies about us. So it's a massive campaign now to denigrate One Nation, because what you've got is a club: Labor, Greens, Liberal, National.
And media.
Yeah, and the media perpetuates the club. You're absolutely right. The media perpetuates the club by saying Labor, Greens, Liberal, National, Labor, Greens, Liberal, National. And the whole debate is about between these two who will be in power. And more what we've seen now is we've seen independent third party come along. One Nation, United Australia Party, Liberal Democrats. We're the head of the pack of them by far now. And so there's a very good chance that we will get a lot of the other independent third-party voters, because they can see that One Nation's the one that's been around for a long time. It's the only one surviving now. And so I foresee a big increase in interest in One Nation, especially when the pain of these climate policies comes along, and especially when people are realizing we're starting to really expose the corruption that went on with the COVID gross mismanagement by Morrison and the Labor state government on COVID. And that's really costing us a hell of a lot of money.
I think with Marani, because Steve Andrews is now fairly entrenched there, and I think he's got to be maybe a 20-year member. I also looked over the federal election figures, basically in Central and North Queensland, and you poll well in Capricornia, Flynn, and Dawson, 12 to 14%, and that actually is really around the coal country, isn't it? I mean, that's where the coal industry is, and you had some good candidates even up here in Leichhardt, although she only got about 7%, which is still fair.
She's a very good candidate. She's very good.
That was Gina Court, and I met her. I thought she was quite good. I think one of the keen things now is to get candidates in place at least 12 months beforehand. Do you see One Nation and your executive down there getting geared up so you can have well checked out good candidates in place 12 months before the event? Because I think that's getting to be a key thing where it gives them an opportunity to get out amongst the electorate. And the other thing is too, the electorates, Townsville and Cairns, you've got 3 electorates each, and they're not overly big. So I think it's very helpful to get someone in there 12 months beforehand, get up their profile, give them plenty of time to go and speak to the constituents to really boost the thing along.
Yeah, that's a very astute comment. That and to answer your question, yes, people are doing that in head office now. We're setting up for the next election. We have been, we lack the funds, so we have to run a shoestring campaign at the last minute. But we are looking forward now to actually setting up for 2024 now, and endorsing some candidates. I think have already been endorsed.
I suppose it's a matter of them to start being, or start to be reported. But the other thing is, one of the things I find about One Nation is the failure to actually invest in local branches. I think local candidates really need that established workforce or group behind them to make real good inroads in that. Do you think there's got to be a situation where one time or other that you'll at least look at establishing branches in at least in say Townsville, Mackay, Rockhampton, and Cairns?
Well, we do have to get more grassroots representation. We have a reputation for listening, Pauline and I, so we get around a lot. And we do listen, and people know that about us, and we do take notice of what the people say. The problem with branches is that in the 1998, they were flooded with, what do you call it? People who were really working for the established parties. They undermined our party. There was a deliberate attempt to scuttle the branches, and Pauline's been very concerned about that ever since, and I think that's rightly so. So we've got to work out some other way of getting involvement without enabling it to be infiltrated by Labor and Liberal, which is what they did in the 1990s and early 2000s.
I suppose there's the things in there. I mean, a lot of associations and organisations have got systems where you've got to be nominated by at least 2 members and verified that you do have a real genuine interest in what you're doing. But I think that was the same situation with Bernardi. I mean, he got a big following in that, but he never went down the local branches system. And I think maybe that was a mistake, or it was intended in the fact that he really was only there as a front man to stop the vote going too far from the Liberals. And he probably hold a lot of voters from joining One Nation. That if he wasn't there, they probably would have flowed to One Nation.
Yes, it's important to understand, you mentioned media a little while ago. We have Liberal, Nationals, Labor, Greens. They're both pushing the same policies. The media is owned by the globalists who push those policies. The globalist predator billionaires like Gates is over here. He's got investments in climate. He's got investments in agriculture. He's got investments in vaccines. Yes, pharmacy. And there's another one, investment in energy. He is working on those issues to feather his own nest. You've got Gates, who then funds the media and gives media, especially regional media, hundreds of millions of dollars to not report things that go against the global narrative. So you've got the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, in an alliance that was formed in 2018, pushing these policies that are destroying our country. And what they're working on feverishly is to make sure that you either have a choice of Labor or Liberal, both the same policies. They would do everything they possibly can to cancel out One Nation or any other minor party. So that's what we've got to do, is wake up the people and get directed to people. That's why your podcast is so important. At least one nation can be heard on your podcast.
I think the other thing is too that in addition to the pain that will probably wake up people, I think also the narrative that's getting more and more common and is getting a bit of exposure is these events from like the World Economic Forum and the way these people talk about the plebs and what they're going to do for them. You know, the guy from Saudi Arabia is basically suggesting that we should get most of the humans and just basically treat them as battery hens and put them in this sort of accommodation. I mean, do you think that's also to eventually going to get people to arc up in regards to what have these people got planned for us? You know, as a little bit more publicity and a bit more awareness of those sort of agendas come into people's lives.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You know, Pauline Hanson called out United Nations Agenda 21 in 1996, and they ridiculed her for it. It's their first response was, it doesn't exist. This is the booklet that the United Nations put out at the time in 1992 from the Rio Declaration. They are about control. It does exist. The World Economic Forum is about control. It exists. In 2018, they formed an alliance. They're working together. They want to control property rights. They want to control energy. They want to control food supply. They want to control water. They want to control how you live, where you live. They're wanting to control your health. We've now got the World Health Organization, which is part of the UN, talking about a pandemic treaty in which they give instructions to national governments on what you will and will not get injected with, whether or not you have a lockdown, all kinds of restrictions. It's bad enough when it comes from Canberra. When it comes from somewhere in New York or Geneva, that's far, far worse. These people are crooks and criminals. We know that, I think we might have talked about Maurice Strong last time. The whole of this climate campaign is based upon Maurice Strong's lies on climate. It was orchestrated. The whole lot was orchestrated. He was wanted for UN scandals like food and oil, what was it, food for oil programs. He was wanted by American law enforcement officials for crimes that were committed in Western United States. He was also a director of the Chicago Climate Exchange, where he sought to make billions from trading carbon dioxide credits. All the carbon dioxide credits would feed through the Chicago Climate Exchange, and Maurice Strong was one of the directors. Maurice Strong was a crook, yet our policies in this country are based upon his statements about climate. That is it. We've also got him. He's an inhuman. He's dead now, but he was an inhuman crook because he said he had two aims in life, Bill. One was to put in place an unelected socialist global governance, and the other one was to deindustrialize Western civilization. Get rid of all the things that we have around us. Get rid of them. We all go back to living in caves. They're trying to control food production. We've got Barnaby Joyce as Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, giving $64 million to the UN Food Summit to help with their campaign to develop alternative food supplies by eating insects, eating bugs. I mean, they're supposed to be standing up for the beef farmers and the sheep farmers in this country and exporting any surplus, but looking after the people of this country. They're feeding money to the United Nations campaign to develop bugs and insects. Mate, I'm not going to eat bugs and insects, but what we've got is a hell of a fight on our hands because these people are not loyal to Australia. They're trying to cull the herd. We can see that in the numbers. They're trying to cull the herd on the basis that cows fart and burp. Complete rubbish. There is no evidence for that. But New Zealand, the farmers are gutted. Jacinda Ardern imposed that. She's a graduate from the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program. They're infected everywhere. Macron is. Merkel, and she used to be at the head of the government in Germany. Trudeau in Canada is. So we've got countries all over the West being infiltrated. The World Economic Forum has taken pride in saying publicly that their graduates have infiltrated cabinets of major countries around the world. The Democrats have got many, many World Economic Forum graduates. The Republicans have got 8. They're on both sides of politics. We've got one in Andrew Bragg in the Liberal Party in the Senate in Canberra. We've got one in the Labor Party in the cabinet. What's her name? O'Neill. We've got one in the Greens in the Senate, Sarah Hanson-Young. We've got our own graduates infiltrating this country, both sides of politics. Make no mistake, they are looking after global agenda, suppressing the national agenda, and to control people. Their whole agenda is about control people. And when they deny things like this, after they publish it, you know that they're liars.
I think the other thing is too, I think there's hopefully going to be a lot more awareness with people in regards to what national sovereignty means and what it means to surrender it. And I don't think there's enough discussion about that at the moment. It's alluded to it sometimes, but there needs to be greater understanding for the public what it means to surrender the national rights for certain programs, like this new one with the UN and its World Health Organization, to us as a nation becoming subservient to an unelected body. And hopefully, very quickly, the public will become aware of this sort of thing and rally against it, and rally against politicians that want to surrender our sovereignty and also our national security, whether it's in energy or anything, or our actual national security in regards to defence.
Nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. There's so much that you can talk about. I made a submission, dissenting report actually, to the Senate Select Inquiry into the government's Northern Development Agenda. This was back a couple of years ago, when was it? 2021, 2022, early 22 maybe. Henry Kissinger, who's a globalist, he's now 99. He is an evil person who's responsible for many of the wars around the world. He's been working with Soros, another globalist. Henry Kissinger said, if you control the money, they do. If you control energy, they do. If you control food supply, they do. You can control the whole continent. They also want to control water. They want to control property rights. They want to control education. We've now got a generation of people who've been dumbed down and ignorant of what's going on. They now think that you can change your gender. I mean, that's so basic. But during my listening to people giving evidence at inquiries around the country, around the north, into the government's Northern Development Agenda, under the Morrison government's Northern Development Agenda, I said the major challenges to be addressed in developing North Australia are clearly electricity, price, availability, reliability of supply, stability and security of supply; water, availability, reliability of supply, price; land tenure. Aboriginals can't develop land. They can't make investments. They can't borrow money because we have not given them land with native title. We have taken the land off the whites and not given it to the Aboriginals because in the preamble to the Native Title Act, it littered with the words United Nations. This was an attempt to steal the land and not give it anywhere. They just want to lock it up. The opportunity for Aboriginals to rightly share in the North's development and wealth, we believe that is only right. Next point, economic environment, including productive capacity, being in part infrastructure with priorities on water, transport and communication. Next point, government meddling and bureaucratic ignorance, red tape, green tape and blue tape. Blue tape is UN tape. The high cost of, next point, then the high cost of living due in places to remoteness or diseconomies of scale, or a lack of competition for providers of services. Housing, investment funds, insurance and tax. Now, the majority of those points, if not all of them, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Bill, the North is crying out for this. The regions are crying out for this. And yet at the same time as they're crying out for it in the North and in the regions, they're destroying it in the South. They're destroying electricity supply. They're destroying water availability. They're stealing land tenure. We have a person near Brisbane, living in a major town near Brisbane. He has had several blocks of land. He finally decided to sell them. The Brisbane, it wasn't Brisbane, but the local government, the city council, stole significant proportion of his land to make a public reserve. I've got no problem with public reserves. I have got a problem if they steal your land and don't compensate you for it. That is theft. That is the destruction. That's heading towards communism. The productive capacity, these things, government meddling and bureaucratic ignorance, these things are destroying the country in the South, and they're now becoming problems in the North. They're major problems. How the hell can we fix these problems in the North when we're making them worse in the South?
Well, the other thing is we've had rhetoric. We're going back to, I think the white paper for developing Northern Australia goes back to about 2013, 2014. And since then, we've had both parties, state and federal government, talking up, we'll go to develop North, we've got to invest in North, that's where potential is. It's never got past the rhetoric stage. You know, when every time, and this is what's annoying, especially up here in far North Queensland, it seems that locals have to come up and push the project, and then inevitably it's knocked back on some sort of bean counters return of capital issue. We've had the Nalinga Dam, the Kuranda Range Road will never get improved in another two generations. It's got to be locked in and can be a complete bottleneck to the economic development of far north. But we've had this rhetoric, but we haven't had any reality to it. And I don't see any hope of change when the only projects that are sort of in line at the moment and they're pushing is renewables. There's not a dam to be seen. The Bruce Highway is still an ongoing another 50-year project before it's dual carriageway both ways with separation barriers and doing our first grade road. And there's no real investment in wealth creation. Every time someone wants to come up with an idea or comes up with an idea to establish a cotton gin, a new irrigation system, they're put through every hoop and made to put in great expenses in regards to their plan, but inevitably it's just not back.
No, you're right. You look at Cubby Station in the south of our state here. Cubby used to get smashed all the time by the media, by southern farmers, by the politicians. I did a video on Cubby using this thing, you know, just a telephone and a video camera. And I'm no major producer. All I did was go to Cubby and get the facts out of them. Cubby is a phenomenal project. They don't steal water from other farmers. They don't take any more than their supply. Sometimes they don't take their supply of water authorized by regulation because they want to leave it in the rivers to do an environmental job at a specific time. I published that video. It's a 9-minute video, about 2017, 2018. They now get no complaints and no mentions in the media because people have woken up to the facts. What we've got in this country is a complete absence of bureaucrats and politicians who understand that you have to have a productive capacity to generate jobs. Government does not create a single job. Government gets in the way of jobs. We need to sort out the taxation system so that we can and remove a lot of the regulations so that we can get back to basics and let people invest. They will only invest if they can get a return. When you get a return from your investment, you employ more people. But here's another one, housing crisis. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. We've got regulations all over the place suppressing housing and raising the prices. We've got now Albanese wanting another $300,000 people per annum to come into this country. What the hell is that going to do to the house prices? It's going to drive them through the roof. What's it going to do to wages? It's going to suppress wages. This is just crazy. We have got a rental crisis in most areas of regional Queensland and in city areas, and yet they're going to make it worse. Why don't people here want to work? Because the taxation system's buggered. We've got to bring foreigners in to work our farms? Come on.
But mass immigration was always a Ponzi scheme to cover up our bad management and bad government. It's just allowed them, more people come in, so it keeps certain industry going and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you let these people in, you're also supposed to create infrastructure to handle it and provide service.
Correct.
And that's where they fall down. They get this boost from these people coming in, but then the problems of providing the service, the infrastructure, that falls onto the states, and then further down it falls down onto local governments. So Canberra's sitting there very smugly, oh, we've got a great economy, it's going up by so many, but all these shortfalls of because you've failed to deliver the required infrastructure and service compound over time, and that's where we've been left now.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Government's role is to create the environment in which people invest to make jobs and make a profit. Government is not there to create jobs. Government is there to create the investment so that individuals come along and invest in a project, invest in an industry, and that's what creates jobs. Government is become a bloated parasite on the backs of good investors. And what's more, we've also got governments now dealing out favors to their vested interests, their mates, so that they're the ones who get the government support. They're the ones who get the tick of approval. And yet we've got good farmers, good small businesses, good medium businesses, employees going to waste because they cannot invest.
Well, I think that's been seen in Townsville with there's been a fair bit of interest in Townsville with hydrogen hubs, energy hubs. And you see this, I think it was just reported today, there's got to be $75 million minerals processing plant. State government's building it. Like, if it was such a great idea, wouldn't they just lay the groundwork in regards to policies to support the investment? And if it was so good, a private person or company or whatever, not actual taxpayers' money, but I think this is $75 million on top of just the recent another $80 million that went into that hub. It's taxpayers' money.
Well, hydrogen, at the moment, it costs $6 a kilogram to produce hydrogen. Morrison came out with his electoral policy to get votes. He's saying that he would want to get it down to $2. That's 2/3 reduction. No policies, no specific technology, nothing, but we'll get it down to $2. If you use hydrogen at $2 a kilogram, the unit cost of electricity is $200 per megawatt hour. That's 5 times what a coal-fired power station can produce it for. This is all pipe dreams to get votes. And also, who signed up for the incentives and the subsidies? Billionaires. What we're doing is we're taking money from everyday Australians through our taxes and giving it to billionaires. You look at the billionaires who are making money out of solar, out of wind, proposed out of hydrogen. Some of these contracts have been signed. You look at the Climate 200 people. It is investing. They're donating money to the Teals. They're donating money to Pocock. Where do they get their money from? People who make money out of solar panels and wind turbines. What we're getting now is policies from the Greens, the Teals, that are supporting the billionaires to get richer, wrapped in the bullshit that it is helping the climate. It's not.
I think at least there might be a little bit of hope on the horizon in regards to the Sun Cable project, which was Mr. Twiggy Forrest and Mike Cannon-Brooks. Now, it's quite interesting when you read that. It sort of suggests that they're in boots and all, funding and stuff like that. But actually, when you read the detail, they were never putting up much of their own money. They were just creating a system there to encourage other people to invest. And I think they've got got up to about 220 odd million dollars invested, but that's basically been blown before they've even got anything real on the ground. And anyone who believes that project could have come in at $35 billion has to be a lunatic, because the 42 gigawatts hours of battery that was proposed, working on the Tesla battery for Hornsdale, would have cost $59 billion by itself.
Yep. This is all pipe dream stuff. It's to transfer wealth from individual taxpayers, workers, small businesses, to people who get subsidies, which is billionaires and some major corporations. The Chinese, you know, they're bright people. They're industrious people. But the Chinese Communist Party is now making a killing out of our electricity sector, our manufacturing sector. We are handing the jobs to China. That's all that's going on. And they're sending us solar. We send them coal and iron ore. They send us solar panels and wind turbines that raise our electricity prices and destroy our electricity sector and our manufacturing sector.
The other scary part is the politicians that keep furthering this, they must have their head in the sand if they're not looking at Britain and Germany in particular. All these proposed things in regards to, I think Britain was going to have this great big battery factory and that called Multivolt. I think that's just basically gone under, and they're talking about, well, that will have to go to China. I think the electric cars like the Mini and that was going to be a British project and built in Britain. They found out it's just too expensive because of the cost of electricity. So that will be going to China. And so basically, the more you invest in renewables electricity, the more industry you've got to ship to China so it can be done.
Yeah, and if you look at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, they've told us they want to control people. They have told us they will restrict energy. The real issue with energy is not different energy, it's reduced energy, so they can control what we do. They're starting to fit meters to monitor energy in central Queensland. I know a friend of mine up there who said, go to hell, you're not fitting that meter on my electricity. The real issue with electric vehicles, they will never, ever compete on price with internal combustion engines. Never. Because there's just too much resources invested in a car, too much exotic resources, too much energy in building them. And so what you've got there is a removal of cars. It's not changing cars, it's no cars. What they want is people to live, I'm looking out in Brisbane here, they want people to live in skyscrapers, pack and stack boxes. They want to control the food supply by having the food supply nearby with bugs. They want to control the water. They want to control the energy, and they want social credit systems. I mean, this is not something we're making up. They want to control it with central bank digital currencies. They want to control you so that everything you do, everything you say is monitored. This, again, is not me making this up. This is taking stuff that's come out of the government. We had to rise up against the government and the Labor Party under Morrison. Both the Labor Party and the Federal Liberal Party were wanting to push a cash ban bill. Why do they want a cash ban bill? So they could control your use of digital currency, because there'd be no cash eventually. This, again, is not me saying this. This is World Economic Forum stuff, United Nations stuff. They're saying this, and our dopes in Canberra, our dopes in Brisbane, and the politicians are just feeding these policies through. They're just good lackeys.
Well, all I can say is hope people wake up before we're all turned into battery chickens. But we've gone over the hour now, so if we could just wind it up.
Yeah, sure.
Just looking at One Nation going forward over the next couple of years, you've got the New South Wales election only a couple of months away. I think it's the 25th or 26th of March. So you've got Mark Latham down there in the upper house. He's going up again. Do you see, what sort of prospects do you see in the New South Wales election?
Very, very good, because the Labor Party is on the nose in New South Wales. They've not put up any viable alternatives. And the Liberal Party is well and truly on the nose in New South Wales. The Liberal Nationals have been embroiled in scandal, and people are looking to Mark. Mark's been gaining a lot of traction in the media even. They're open up to Mark in the media. He's been saying some very sensible things. Mark is a down-to-earth person. He supports workers. He supports investors who want to work for this country. Mark is the answer for New South Wales. So we're very confident that he will get a very strong reception in the election.
And then, of course, all attention will have to turn back to Queensland, your home state. So hopefully in the next few weeks of that, I'll have a talk to Steve Andrew in regards to what's happening in Mirani, and especially the possible outcome of the pumped hydro up there, and what he's doing to support the people in the local area to sort of at least get some reconsideration of that project. But
well,
again,
you know, that pumped hydro it won't go ahead. It can't go ahead. It's just a headline grabber. That's all it is. It's rubbish.
Well, the other thing is, the more you look at those sort of things, I don't think a lot of people realise that pump hydro provides no amenity. Like when we've got a big dam, it provides amenity. Like you can actually go swimming in the dam, or there's usually water skiing or whatever if it's big enough for that. I mean, basically, a pumped hydro is either all the upper reservoirs are full and the bottom reservoir is just a big mud patch, or it's half and halfway between that. It's devoid of life as well. So not only do you get no amenity out of it far as human activity and that, but also the general life that surrounds that sort of complex diminishes.
Well, you know, we did a quick calculation on the Burdekin Falls Dam. That could be drained in 18 hours at that so-called pumped hydro capacity. 18 hours. What are you going to do the next 3 days while the clouds are over, and there's no sunshine? This is complete rubbish. If you look at the Snowy scheme, you want to wind it up, so we haven't got time to go into the details. I can provide the details in another show. But the Snowy scheme is actually, when we asked for the business case, they would not give it to us. When we looked at the cost-benefit analysis, most of it was redacted. There is no sense to Snowy 2, with Snowy 2 being the pumped hydro. There is no sense to this one up in the Mackay hinterland. It is a complete pipe dream. It is just to get headlines to pretend that they're doing something about it. These chickens are going to come home to roost, and always the people will pay. The people will pay through loss of jobs and high cost of living.
I think the other thing with Snowy 2.0 was the lack of reference to the actual cost of additional transmission facilities required. I think that was sort of, don't worry about this. This is just talk about your generation capacity, and the transmission costs weren't an issue. And this is a thing that annoys a lot of people, especially in northern Queensland, is when we go to ask for a dam, the grilling that the project gets in regards to cost benefit analysis is horrendous. And the other thing is, what they want is a return. They want return on a dam in 30 years to justify it. But a dam can sit there for 100, 200 years. So these ridiculous methods of accounting apply for one project for us that's going to create wealth, but then they use a complete different formula for if it's renewables.
I've had a mental blank. There's a guy called Sam Colton. Sam Colton is an irrigation farmer around Goondiwindi area, and he told me about a project that his dad did. I think they own land in New South Wales and Queensland. Anyway, what they did, there's a dam in northern New South Wales called the Pindari Dam. And they said that if they increased the height of the dam wall, they would increase the water stored by 9 times. I'm pretty sure this is the story. So the growers, the farmers in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland went to the New South Wales state government and said, if you lend us half the money, we will pay half the price, the cost of that dam being raised. And the state government looked at it, and I might have some of my facts wrong here, but the story is important. When they found out when they planned for the increased value of production due to that water, the state government went, wow, let's do this. And Sam said the only thing that surprised them about the project when it was done was how quickly the farmers paid off the loan. These things are gold. Water transforms good agricultural land into being dynamite. Highly valuable production. That's what we've got to get. We've got to get governments out of job creation. We've got to get them back into creating the environment in which people like farmers, small businesses, large businesses can make decent investments, have a tax system that is fair and reasonable, and look after the basics, get rid of some of the regulations. We've got to get people back to work in this country.
I think that's a fine note to finish on. If you just hold on the line, I'll introduce next week's show and we'll have a quick chat. Thank you very much for your time, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Bill. Keep going. We've got to get more private, independent news.
If you enjoyed today's show, please like us on Facebook and subscribe to our Facebook page. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I'll be talking to Graham Park. Graham is the president of the Shooters Union, and we'll be talking about all things shooting and whether we need to become familiar with firearms or just fear them. So join me next week for that interview. Thanks very much.